I saw her yesterday. It's been 22 years, but the second she walked through the revolving doors of my hotel, I knew it was her. I didn't need a second glance. I knew the way she carried herself, the tilt of her chin, the faint curve of her lips. Some things don't change. I stayed out of sight, ducking behind the office door with my name on it. Robert Carson, owner. It's funny. I built this place with my own hands, brick by brick. Every inch of this hotel feels like an extension of me. Yet, in that moment, I felt like a stranger in my own space. From my spot in the office, I could see her at the desk. My staff greeted her warmly, as they always do. I pride myself on hiring good people, the kind who can make even the most difficult guests feel welcome. She smiled back at them, handing over her ID and credit card like she was any other guest. But she wasn't. She didn't notice me watching. Why would she? I'm not the same person I was 22 years ago. I've lost the boyish face, the scrawny frame. The stress of life and the weight of time has a way of reshaping you. I've learned to carry myself differently too. People see me now, respect me, but she wouldn't know that. I haven't thought about her in years, not really. I moved on. At least, I told myself I did. But seeing her yesterday, standing in my lobby as if she belonged there, stirred something in me I thought was long dead. She hasn't changed much. Sure, the years have softened her a bit, but she still has that kind of beauty that makes people stop and stare, even if they don't want to. I remember how that beauty destroyed me. The staff handed her the key card, wished her a pleasant stay, and she disappeared into the elevator. That's when I finally exhaled. My hands were shaking, and my heart felt like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. I didn't think it would hit me like this, but it did. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to storm up to her room and demand to know why she was here, after all these years. Another part of me wanted to retreat into the past, back to a time before everything went wrong, before I became this. That woman is my ex-wife, the one who destroyed me. Her name is Claire. We met in 1999 when I was 22 years old and working as a concierge at the Wyndham Hotel. She was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone fall silent. And somehow, she chose me. At least, I thought she did. When I met Claire, I was just a kid trying to make ends meet. I was working long shifts as a concierge at the Wyndham Hotel in Chicago, a gig I landed because I could talk to anyone and always managed to keep my cool, even when guests were unreasonable. Claire wasn't a guest. She was new to the city, fresh out of college, and working as a receptionist at a law firm downtown. We met by chance one Friday evening in the fall of 1999. The hotel was hosting some networking event, and she came as someone's plus one. I can still see her walking through the lobby, wearing this pale blue dress that hugged her curves like it was designed just for her. I was stationed at the concierge desk, watching her glide across the marble floor, and for a second, I forgot what I was supposed to be doing. Rob? My coworker nudged me, smirking. You're staring. I snapped out of it, embarrassed, but I couldn't stop sneaking glances at her. She had this confidence about her, like she knew she was the most beautiful woman in the room but didn't care to flaunt it. I didn't expect her to notice me. Women like Claire didn't notice guys like me. At least, that's what I believed. I wasn't bad-looking, but I wasn't rich or flashy. I lived in a crummy studio apartment and drove a beat-up Nissan Sentra. But then, halfway through the evening, she walked up to my desk. Hi, she said, her voice smooth and warm. Do you know where the coat check is? It wasn't a special question. It was the kind of thing I got asked 100 times a day. But the way she smiled at me made it feel special. Just down that hallway, I said, pointing to the left. You can't miss it. Thanks, Rob, she said, glancing at my name tag. I watched her walk away, feeling like I'd just been struck by lightning. She came back a few minutes later, coat in hand, and lingered at the desk. So, do you work here full-time? I was taken aback. Small talk wasn't usually part of the job. Yeah. I've been here about a year now. It's not bad. Good tips. She laughed softly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Good tips, huh? I'll have to remember that. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, grinning like an idiot. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. Well, I should get going, she said finally. But maybe I'll see you around, Rob. And just like that, she was gone. She didn't come back to the hotel until a month later. This time, it wasn't for an event. She just walked in one afternoon, wearing a leather jacket and jeans, and asked me if I wanted to grab coffee when my shift ended. I couldn't believe it. Women like Claire didn't go for guys like me. But there she was, asking me out like it was the most natural thing in the world. We started dating, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was winning. Claire made me feel like I was the only person in the room. She laughed at my dumb jokes, kissed me like she meant it, and talked about the future like it was something we'd build together. I fell hard. Fast. By 2001, we were living together. My place was too small and run down for her taste, so we moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. It was a stretch for my budget, but I didn't care. I would have done anything to keep her happy. At first, everything was great. I'd come home from work, and she'd be there, curled up on the couch, waiting for me. We'd cook dinner together, watch old movies, and fall asleep tangled up in each other. But things started to shift after a year. Claire had always been ambitious, but now it felt like she was restless. She started staying late at work, going to more networking events, and talking about climbing the ladder at her firm. I was proud of her. I really was, but I started to feel like I couldn't keep up. I was still working at the hotel, dreaming about maybe managing a property one day, while she was rubbing elbows with lawyers and executives. And then, one night in 2003, everything came crashing down. I came home late from work. I'd picked up an extra shift to cover rent because Claire had mentioned wanting to save for a nicer apartment. I was exhausted, but I was excited to see her. The second I walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. The lights were dimmed, and there were 2 wine glasses on the coffee table, one of them half empty. Claire was sitting on the couch, her face pale, and next to her was my best friend, Mike. I froze in the doorway, trying to process what I was seeing. Mike, my best friend since high school. We'd been through everything together. Late-night cramming sessions for finals, road trips in my beat-up car, hours of talking about our dreams and plans for the future. He was family. And now, he was sitting on my couch in my apartment with my girlfriend. Claire stood up as soon as she saw me, her face flushed. Rob, you're home early. Early? It was nearly midnight. I texted her during my shift to say I'd be late. I guess she thought I'd be too tired to notice or care. Yeah, I said, my voice hollow. Guess I am. Mike shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Hey, Rob, he said, as if this was just a casual hangout. What the hell is going on? I asked, stepping inside and shutting the door behind me. Claire glanced at Mike, then back at me. We were just... Don't. I snapped, my voice rising. Don't you dare say you were just talking. There's 2 wine glasses on the table, Claire. It's midnight. What the hell is going on? Mike stood up, hands raised like he was trying to calm me down. It's not what you think, man. I laughed bitterly. Oh, really? Then what is it, Mike? Please, enlighten me. Claire stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Rob, we weren't doing anything. Mike just came over to talk. That's all. Talk about what? I demanded, glaring at her. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. You've got to be kidding me, I said, my voice shaking. It's not like that, Mike said quickly. I swear, Rob, nothing happened. I stared at him, my so-called best friend, and felt something inside me snap. Get out. What? He asked, looking genuinely surprised. Get out, I repeated, my voice dangerously low. Mike hesitated, glancing at Claire as if she might back him up, but she didn't say a word. Finally, he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. I'm sorry, man, he muttered before leaving. The second the door closed behind him, I turned to Claire. Start talking. She looked at me, her eyes wide and tearful. Rob, I swear, nothing happened. Bullshit, I spat. You're sitting here, drinking wine with my best friend, and I'm supposed to believe nothing happened? Do you think I'm an idiot? I didn't plan this, she said, her voice trembling. He showed up unannounced. He said he needed to talk. I didn't know what to do. So, you invited him in and opened a bottle of wine? She didn't answer. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to calm myself down. Claire, I need you to tell me the truth. Have you been seeing him? Her silence was deafening. Claire, I pressed, my voice cracking. Just tell me. She broke down, covering her face with her hands. It only happened once, she sobbed. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Once, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. It was a mistake, she said through her tears. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just— Don't, I interrupted, shaking my head. Don't say it just happened. That's not an excuse. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Rob. I swear. It didn't mean anything. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to feel. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. It all hit me at once, like a tidal wave. Why? I asked finally. She shook her head. I don't know. I was stupid. I wasn't thinking. Please, Rob. I'll do anything to make it right. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that it really was just a stupid mistake, that she regretted it, that we could move past it. Against my better judgment, I forgave her. For a while, things seemed to get better. She was attentive, affectionate, and constantly reassuring me that she loved me and only me. I wanted to believe her so badly that I ignored the nagging doubts in the back of my mind. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Claire wasn't the same, and neither was I. For months, I convinced myself we were okay. Claire had made a mistake, a terrible one. But people screw up, right? That's what I kept telling myself. I wanted to believe she regretted it. I wanted to believe she was still the person I fell in love with. To show her I was committed to moving forward, I even splurged on a Motorola V300 for her. It was one of the newest flip phones at the time, and I thought it'd make her life easier with her busy schedule. It wasn't cheap, not on my salary, but I wanted her to know I'd do anything for her. I handed it to her in a little gift bag one evening, and she smiled that dazzling smile of hers, the one that used to melt me. She hugged me, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're so thoughtful, Rob. I don't deserve you." In hindsight, maybe she was right. For a while, it felt like things were getting better. Claire was more attentive, more affectionate, constantly reassuring me that she loved me and only me. I wanted to believe her so badly that I ignored the nagging doubts in the back of my mind. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Claire wasn't the same, and neither was I. At first, it was little things. She'd leave her new Motorola phone face down on the coffee table or suddenly step outside to take a call, saying it was work stuff. Her late nights at the office became more frequent, and she started dressing differently. Heels instead of flats, blouses that showed just enough skin to get noticed. I chalked it up to her ambition. She wanted to climb the ladder at her firm, and who was I to stand in her way? But one night in the spring of 2003, everything fell apart. It was a Friday. Claire had told me she was meeting some colleagues for drinks after work, so I figured I'd surprise her. I bought her favorite flowers, lilies, and made a reservation at a little Italian place she loved. When I got to the bar she mentioned, I didn't see her. I called her Motorola, and when she answered, her voice was strangely high-pitched. "Hey, babe," she said. "What's up? Where are you?" I asked. "Still at the office," she replied quickly. "Why?" I froze. "You said you were getting drinks with coworkers." "Oh," she stammered. "Yeah, we decided to cancel. Too much work to finish up." She was lying. I could hear it in her voice. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "See you at home." I hung up, my mind racing. Something wasn't right. Instead of going home, I drove to her office. It was a sleek glass building downtown, surrounded by streetlights that reflected off the windows like stars. Her firm's logo was prominently displayed on the side. Her car wasn't in the lot. I parked across the street, sat in my car, and waited. An hour passed, then two. Finally, around 10 p.m., I saw her step out of a black town car in front of the building. She wasn't alone. The man was older, mid-50s maybe, with silver hair and an expensive suit. He held the door open for her, and she laughed as she climbed out. It wasn't the kind of polite laugh you'd give your boss. It was the kind of laugh I thought she reserved for me. They stood on the sidewalk, talking for a moment. Then he reached out and touched her arm, letting his hand linger just a second too long. She didn't pull away. I felt my stomach drop. I followed them. I don't know what came over me. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just knew I needed answers. They walked a few blocks to an upscale hotel, the kind of place that had a valet and chandeliers in the lobby. I parked nearby and watched as they disappeared through the revolving doors. I waited for what felt like an eternity. Every second that passed felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Eventually, I got out of the car. My legs felt like lead as I crossed the street and stepped into the lobby. I walked up to the desk and gave the receptionist the best fake smile I could muster. "Hi, I'm supposed to meet a friend here, but I forgot his room number. Could you check for me?" "His name's Alex," I said, using the name I'd overheard when she introduced me to her boss months earlier. The receptionist gave me a skeptical look, but checked anyway. "Room 803, she said. "Thanks," I said, my voice tight. I stood there for a moment, staring at the elevator. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. When I got to the 8th floor, I stood outside room 803, staring at the door. My fists clenched and unclenched as I tried to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But another part of me, the part that couldn't let go of the betrayal, needed to know. I knocked. There was a long pause. Then, finally, the door opened. Claire stood there, her hair slightly disheveled, her cheeks flushed. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening in shock. "Rob," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Behind her, Alex appeared, buttoning his shirt. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, at them, at the undeniable proof of what she'd done. "Rob, it's not," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Don't even try." Alex stepped forward, holding up his hands. "Look, this isn't what it seems." "Shut the hell up," I snapped, glaring at him. He took a step back, clearly not expecting me to stand my ground. "Claire," I said, turning my attention back to her. "How long?" She didn't answer. "How long?" I shouted, my voice echoing down the hallway. She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely audible. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice breaking. "I gave you everything. I forgave you after Mike. I tried to trust you again, and this is what you do." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I turned to Alex, who was standing there looking uncomfortable. "I hope she's worth it," I spat before storming off. The drive home felt endless. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road instead of the memory of Claire standing there, disheveled, with him. In the passenger seat were the lilies I'd bought for her, a stupid attempt to surprise her and salvage whatever was left of us. The bouquet looked absurd now, mocking me with every turn. I pulled over halfway home, stepped out, and hurled the flowers into a trash bin. They landed with a hollow thud, petals scattering like pieces of my pride. When I got home, I didn't collapse into tears or wallow in self-pity. No, I went into the kitchen, grabbed the first thing I saw, a bottle of cheap whiskey, and poured myself a glass. Then another. The sharp burns steadied me, cleared the fog in my mind. For hours, I sat at the dining table, replaying every lie, every late night, every, "You're so thoughtful, Rob," smile she'd thrown my way like breadcrumbs to keep me on her leash. I wasn't a man in that moment. I was a raw nerve, buzzing with anger and humiliation. The world I thought I'd built with her wasn't just crumbling. It had already been bulldozed, and I hadn't even noticed. She came home close to midnight. The second she walked in, I felt it, the shift in the air, the weight of her guilt pressing into the room. "Rob," she said cautiously, setting her bag down like it might explode. "We need to talk." I leaned back in my chair, the half-empty whiskey bottle on the table in front of me. "Oh, we're definitely going to talk," I said, my voice colder than I expected. She hesitated, probably calculating how much I knew. "Listen, You're sleeping with your boss," I said flatly, cutting her off. Her face crumpled. "It's not like that." "Don't insult me by lying again, Claire," I snapped, slamming my glass on the table. I saw you with him. I followed you to the goddamn hotel. Do you really think I'm that stupid? She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For once, she had no excuses. I stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. You know what pisses me off the most? I said, my voice rising. It's not even the cheating. It's the audacity. You looked me in the eye every day and lied. You made me feel like I was crazy, like I was the one who wasn't enough. Her tears started, but I wasn't falling for it. Not this time. I gave you everything, Claire. I continued, my voice cracking. I worked double shifts to keep us in this apartment. I forgave you after you screwed Mike. I bought you that damn Motorola because you said you needed it for work. And for what? So you could make a fool out of me again? It wasn't about you, she said through her sobs. Of course it wasn't, I shot back. It's always been about you, hasn't it? What you want, what you need. God forbid anyone else matters. I didn't wait for her to respond. I stormed past her into the bedroom and started yanking clothes out of the closet. What are you doing? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. Packing your things, I said. You're kicking me out? I laughed, a cold, bitter sound. You cheated, Claire. Twice. You don't get to stay. The fight dragged into the early hours of the morning. She tried everything. Tears, promises, even anger. But I wasn't the same man who forgave her the first time. By 4 a.m., her suitcase was packed, and she was gone. When the door clicked shut, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left nothing but the shell. I looked around the apartment, our apartment, the empty space where her things used to be, the couch where we used to sit and plan our future, the kitchen table where I worked overtime shifts to keep us afloat. The life I thought I'd built with her wasn't just gone. It had been a lie all along. But then, something clicked. I walked to the bathroom mirror and stared at myself. My eyes were bloodshot, my face pale, but there was something else there. Beneath the exhaustion and the anger, there was resolve. I'm done being a fool, I said aloud, my voice firm. And in that moment, I made a decision. I didn't know how or when, but I was going to rebuild my life. I wasn't going to be the guy who got walked on, the guy who played it safe while everyone else played dirty. If Claire wanted a man with power and success, then fine. I'd become one. But I'd do it for me, not for her. That night, I poured the whiskey down the sink, opened my laptop, and started looking up business loans. It wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. The days after Claire left were some of the hardest of my life. I felt like a ghost, going through the motions of work and daily life. But inside, I was hollow. My shifts at the hotel felt endless. Every cheerful, welcome to the Wyndham, tasted bitter in my mouth. But that bitterness started to do something. It lit a fire. One night, a few weeks after Claire had moved out, I stayed late at the concierge desk. I was scrolling through emails, deleting spam offers and newsletters I didn't remember signing up for, when an idea hit me. What if I wasn't on the other side of the desk? What if, instead of smiling politely and bending over backward for guests, I owned the damn place? It sounded ridiculous at first. People like me didn't own hotels. I didn't have money or connections. I was just a guy with a cheap suit and a knack for charming grumpy travelers. But the idea stuck. I started small. Research. I read everything I could find about the hospitality business. Articles, books, even forums where small hotel owners swapped tips and horror stories. It was overwhelming, but it felt good to focus on something that wasn't my anger or my heartbreak. I started saving every spare penny. My studio apartment was a downgrade from the place Claire and I had shared, but it was cheap, and I didn't need much. I picked up extra shifts whenever I could, squirreling away tips and overtime pay like my life depended on it. 6 months after Claire left, I got my first real break. One of the Wyndham managers, an older guy named Frank, pulled me aside after my shift. "Rob," he said, leaning on the edge of the desk, "you ever think about doing more around here?" I blinked at him. What do you mean?" "I mean you're sharp," he said. "You've got a good head for people, and you know this place inside out. You ever think about moving up?" I wasn't expecting that. Frank wasn't the kind of guy who handed out compliments. Honestly, I said. I've thought about it, but I'm not sure I'm cut out for management. Frank laughed. You're already doing half the manager's job. Might as well get paid for it. A month later, I was promoted to assistant manager. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay bump wasn't huge, but it felt like progress. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward. I poured everything into the job. Long hours, late nights, even weekends. I learned how the business worked from the inside out, how to handle staffing, how to negotiate contracts, how to deal with entitled guests who thought the world owed them everything. I wasn't just doing it for the paycheck anymore. I was doing it for the future I wanted to build. By 2005, I'd saved enough to start making serious plans. I wasn't delusional. I knew I couldn't afford a shiny new resort or a big-name franchise. But there were smaller, older properties out there, the kind of places that had seen better days but still had potential. I found one in Indiana. It was a tiny, family-owned place, nothing special, just 20 rooms, a small lobby, and a sad little pool in the back. The owners were retiring, and they were desperate to sell. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I maxed out my savings, took out a loan, and signed the paperwork on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. When the keys were handed to me, I just stood there in the empty lobby for a moment, letting it sink in. I owned a hotel. The first year was brutal. The place needed more work than I expected, plumbing issues, outdated furniture, a website that looked like it was built in 1998. I didn't have the money to hire contractors, so I did as much as I could myself. I painted walls, cleaned carpets, fixed leaky faucets, and learned how to run digital ads to attract guests. I barely slept, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. By 2008, the hotel was turning a modest profit. It wasn't anything flashy, but it was enough to start thinking about expansion. I bought a second property, then a third. Each time, I poured everything I had into making it better. Better service, better amenities, better reviews. Slowly but surely, I built a reputation. By 2015, I owned 5 hotels. Looking back, I don't think I would have made it if Claire hadn't betrayed me. Her leaving me forced me to rebuild myself from the ground up. It made me hungry, determined to prove, to her, to myself, to everyone, that I wasn't a failure. But here's the thing. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about her. It wasn't about proving her wrong or making her regret what she'd done. It was about me, about taking control of my life and becoming the person I was always meant to be. Yesterday, when she walked into my lobby, it all came rushing back. I was standing behind the office door, watching as she stepped up to the desk. Claire. After 22 years, she was right there, as if the universe had decided to drop her back into my life like some cruel joke. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with bits of silver, but she still had that air of effortless elegance. She wore a tailored coat, designer shoes, and a scarf that probably cost more than my first car. The staff greeted her warmly, as they do with all our guests. She smiled at them, handing over her ID, and I felt a jolt of something I couldn't quite name. Anger? Curiosity? Triumph? I stayed hidden, listening as she checked in. She didn't recognize the name of the hotel. It wasn't one of those big chain places she probably stayed at during her work trips back in the day. This was mine. Every detail, every piece of furniture, every damn light bulb in the chandeliers. It was all me. Welcome to the Carson, my receptionist said, sliding the keycard across the desk. The Carson. I named it after myself, not out of ego, but as a reminder of where I came from. The scrawny kid in a cheap suit, working endless shifts at the concierge desk, had built this. Claire thanked the receptionist, tucked her keycard into her purse, and walked toward the elevator. I ducked back into my office, my heart racing. I don't know why I didn't step out. Part of me wanted to march up to her, say something cutting and clever, make her realize who I was. But another part of me, the part that had spent 22 years building a life without her, wasn't sure what I wanted out of this. She was here. She was in my hotel, but she didn't matter anymore. Not really. I sat at my desk, staring at the security camera feed on my laptop. There she was, standing in the elevator, staring at her reflection in the mirrored walls. She looked tired. Not just physically, but the kind of tired that comes from years of trying to outrun your own choices. For the first time, I didn't see the Claire I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. I didn't see the woman who laughed at my dumb jokes or cried in my arms when she thought life was too overwhelming. I saw a stranger. The next morning, I was heading down to the lobby, still shaking off the grogginess from a late night of paperwork. I didn't take the executive elevator. I never did. It felt wrong to separate myself from the day-to-day flow of the place, the pulse of the hotel. The guest elevator was a better way to stay connected, my little reminder of where I'd started. I stepped in, pressed the button for the ground floor, and leaned against the mirrored wall. My thoughts were scattered, drifting between the day's tasks and the quiet satisfaction of knowing Claire was here, unaware that she was staying under my roof. The elevator stopped at the 7th floor. When the doors slid open, she was there. Claire. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catch. For a split second, I thought about pretending I hadn't seen her, but it was too late. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the flicker of recognition, followed by confusion. She stepped in, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She looked the same as she did at check-in, polished, poised. Her heels clicked softly against the elevator floor as she adjusted the strap of her bag, settling into the opposite corner. "Good morning," she said politely. Her voice sent a ripple through me. It wasn't warm, not the way it used to be. It was distant, detached, the voice of someone speaking to a stranger. I nodded, swallowing the urge to say anything more. The ride down was painfully silent, the kind of silence that makes every tiny sound, the hum of the elevator, the soft ding of each passing floor, feel louder than it should. I kept my gaze fixed on the numbers above the door, counting down with deliberate focus. What would I say if she recognized me? Would I tell her who I was, what I'd built, how far I'd come since the day she walked out of my life? Or would I let her leave the elevator with nothing but the vague sense that she'd seen a ghost? It didn't matter. She didn't recognize me. Not really. She glanced at me once or twice, probably trying to place me, but she didn't make the connection. To her, I was just another employee, a nameless figure in a dark suit, blending into the backdrop of her life. And maybe that's what I wanted. The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open to reveal the bustling lobby. I stepped aside, gesturing for her to exit first. She smiled, murmured a quiet "thank you," and walked out, heels clicking against the marble floor. I stayed behind, letting the doors close again. I watched her from a distance that morning. She had breakfast in the restaurant, flipping through her phone between bites of toast and sips of coffee. She looked relaxed, almost carefree. She didn't know. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger or bitterness, but pity. She didn't know she was sitting in the middle of my world, surrounded by the life I'd built without her. She didn't know that the man she dismissed, betrayed, and left behind had risen far above the version of himself she'd walked away from. Later that day, as I was walking through the lobby, I overheard a snippet of conversation between her and one of my receptionists. "This hotel is beautiful," Claire said, her voice carrying just enough charm to make anyone feel flattered. "It's so well run. The staff is excellent." "Thank you," the receptionist said, beaming. "Mr. Carson takes a lot of pride in this place. He's worked so hard to build it." "Mr. Carson?" Claire asked, the faintest edge of curiosity creeping into her tone. "Yes," the receptionist said, gesturing toward my office door. "Robert Carson, the owner." I was standing near the coffee station, watching from the corner of my eye as the truth sank in. Claire turned to glance at the office door, then back at the receptionist. Her eyes widened. Her jaw slackened. For a moment, she looked utterly stunned, like someone had knocked the wind out of her. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. I walked away, leaving her standing there, still processing what she just heard. I didn't feel triumphant or smug. I didn't feel angry or vindictive. I felt free. For the first time in years, I felt like the weight of her betrayal had finally lifted. Claire wasn't my problem anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. This was my world now, and she was just passing through. And maybe that's what she always was. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment wash over me. There was no anger anymore, no bitterness, just a strange, hollow sense of finality. Claire was a chapter in my life, a long, messy, painful chapter, but she wasn't the whole story. My story was here, in this hotel, in the people I'd hired and the guests I'd welcomed. It was in the late nights and early mornings I'd spent turning my dream into a reality. It was in the connections I'd made along the way, the life I'd built from the ashes of what she'd destroyed. When I finally left the office, I made my way to the bar. I stood at the end of the counter, watching the staff work, listening to the hum of conversations and laughter. She was sitting at a corner table, sipping a glass of wine and scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. She didn't notice me. I could have walked over. I could have said something, anything, but I didn't. She wasn't worth it. I turned back to the bartender and ordered a whiskey. Neat. When it arrived, I raised the glass to my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Here's to letting go, I murmured before taking a long sip. The next morning, I was heading down to the lobby, still shaking off the grogginess from a late night of paperwork. I didn't take the executive elevator. I never did. It felt wrong to separate myself from the day-to-day flow of the place, the pulse of the hotel. The guest elevator was a better way to stay connected, my little reminder of where I'd started. I stepped in, pressed the button for the ground floor, and leaned against the mirrored wall. My thoughts were scattered, drifting between the day's tasks and the quiet satisfaction of knowing Claire was here, unaware that she was staying under my roof. The elevator stopped at the 7th floor. When the doors slid open, she was there. Claire. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catch. For a split second, I thought about pretending I hadn't seen her, but it was too late. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the flicker of recognition, followed by confusion. She stepped in, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She looked the same as she did at check-in, polished, poised. Her heels clicked softly against the elevator floor as she adjusted the strap of her bag, settling into the opposite corner. "Good morning," she said politely. Her voice sent a ripple through me. It wasn't warm, not the way it used to be. It was distant, detached, the voice of someone speaking to a stranger. I nodded, swallowing the urge to say anything more. The ride down was painfully silent, the kind of silence that makes every tiny sound, the hum of the elevator, the soft ding of each passing floor, feel louder than it should. I kept my gaze fixed on the numbers above the door, counting down with deliberate focus. What would I say if she recognized me? Would I tell her who I was, what I'd built, how far I'd come since the day she walked out of my life? Or would I let her leave the elevator with nothing but the vague sense that she'd seen a ghost? It didn't matter. She didn't recognize me. Not really. She glanced at me once or twice, probably trying to place me, but she didn't make the connection. To her, I was just another employee, a nameless figure in a dark suit, blending into the backdrop of her life. And maybe that's what I wanted. The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open to reveal the bustling lobby. I stepped aside, gesturing for her to exit first. She smiled, murmured a quiet "thank you," and walked out, heels clicking against the marble floor. I stayed behind, letting the doors close again. I watched her from a distance that morning. She had breakfast in the restaurant, flipping through her phone between bites of toast and sips of coffee. She looked relaxed, almost carefree. She didn't know. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger or bitterness, but pity. She didn't know she was sitting in the middle of my world, surrounded by the life I'd built without her. She didn't know that the man she dismissed, betrayed, and left behind had risen far above the version of himself she'd walked away from. Later that day, as I was walking through the lobby, I overheard a snippet of conversation between her and one of my receptionists. "This hotel is beautiful," Claire said, her voice carrying just enough charm to make anyone feel flattered. "It's so well run. The staff is excellent." "Thank you," the receptionist said, beaming. "Mr. Carson takes a lot of pride in this place. He's worked so hard to build it." "Mr. Carson?" Claire asked, the faintest edge of curiosity creeping into her tone. "Yes," the receptionist said, gesturing toward my office door. "Robert Carson, the owner." I was standing near the coffee station, watching from the corner of my eye as the truth sank in. Claire turned to glance at the office door, then back at the receptionist. Her eyes widened. Her jaw slackened. For a moment, she looked utterly stunned, like someone had knocked the wind out of her. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. I walked away, leaving her standing there, still processing what she just heard. I didn't feel triumphant or smug. I didn't feel angry or vindictive. I felt free. For the first time in years, I felt like the weight of her betrayal had finally lifted. Claire wasn't my problem anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. This was my world now, and she was just passing through.